Alrighty, everybody, this is a 1985 Dodge Ram 50, 2.6 liter manual 5-speed, AC, no power steering, rear-wheel drive. So the first few pics are actually some of the street view maps and some of the first pictures I actually took of the truck. And the last three pics are essentially just me. Actually, I got into an accident with the Ram 50. It was mainly like a ruined collision that wasn't my fault, and I was able to get compensated for the bodywork, most of it. So this truck does have AC, but I've never myself, as an owner, touched it. So I've just been relying on the fan. You know, just the blower motor works, and then just get outside air. It's all functioning, so it's pretty much good enough for California usually. And yeah, I ride, also ride too, so it's not that big of a deal around here. Also, the heat works on this vehicle. Pretty much, you get the blowing of heat through the windshield and anywhere else. And before we get into the pros and cons, let's hear this bad boy run. Let's get into the pros and cons of this particular truck that I've had since 2017. I've been able to put 20,000 miles. It's not my entire daily driver, but I'm sure it is able to do it at this stage, at this point in time, with all the maintenance and stuff that went into it. But yeah, discussing the pros and cons of this truck, I'd say the price and maintenance of the truck is pretty much not that bad compared to most other trucks, I guess you might say. Yeah, I mean, it's inline four. I mean, just not as much as a V8 or V6. Typical wear and tear is just a lot less, lighter weight, stuff like that. Maintenance overall is actually pretty darn easy. The coolant bottle is probably my favorite feature of this truck, which you don't even have to take off any screws. Air filter, the same thing. You don't need to remove any screws apart from the middle one and the carburetor. But that's kind of a safety one so it doesn't fly around. Oil changes, pretty dang simple, filters on the side. Yeah, just the basic stuff is pretty dang easy. The next pro of this particular truck is obviously, it's actually not bad, not a bad hauler and commuter. I've seen like a few ads of like the old school ads of this truck having like a bigger bed and stuff like that. I mean, that's pretty dang true. I mean, it does a bit more than your average Toyota or Nissan for the most part, as far as like capacity of like loads and stuff. And apart from that, a big pro of this truck is that it's not the worst commuter overall, like, you know, the miles per gallon and stuff like that. I'd say the average miles per gallon that the way I drive with this particular truck, I can squeeze in like around 18 miles per gallon. So realistically, that's both highway and street. At this point, I kind of do mainly highway, but you know, that's actually not bad. When I'm hauling, it's probably closer to like lower teens, lower tens. So yeah, that's just the weight. 1,400 pound weight capacity on it. So we're pretty much maxing out. So might as well get 10 miles per gallon, pretty much 12. The third pro I'd say is overall body and design of the truck. That's what made me really like want to purchase it in the first place. So even though it was pretty dang ugly, it probably had one of the best like designs in my opinion, as far as like the mini trucks go. So obviously first gen, they consider this the first gen Dodge Ram 50, Mitsubishi, Mighty Max, all that stuff. So it's probably the best of them, in my opinion, based off like the Plymouth Arrow. So yeah, and like the body design is pretty much, in my opinion, one of the best bodies that I've ever seen on the classic mini truck. So, and then just the bonus pro of this whole truck is that all the, knock on wood, all the gauges function on the vehicle or the truck, and that has to be like, you know, drop dead or alive to find everything that works on the vehicle. I mean, you'd be hard pressed after 40 years, I'm sure, on anything nowadays to have that. And now I'm gonna get into the con of the truck, and this is probably mostly due to like my own wear and tear, and parts from the vehicle's wear and tear. So the first con that I've kind of remedied already is the stock seat that's on it is pretty much no type of spring on it anymore, and it's pretty much like collapsed. I think the springs have collapsed already, like any type of like cushion on it. So the way I remedied it is pretty much, you know, Amazon or like various types of like cushions that like go on top of the seat. It sadly makes like you like pretty much taller, and I'm pretty tall. I'm pretty much like around 6, and I'm kind of like pretty tall sitting on it, but you know, that's kind of the compromise. It's not that big of a deal in my opinion. Maybe you want a little taller ride, but yeah, that pretty much help my back and not let my body take too much of a beating while I'm sitting on it on longer trips. Because in the first place, or the first times that I've used it, it was mainly short trips, and yeah, after I started to do longer trips, I think I started to get worn out, and yeah, I was doing more gym, long distance commuting, so I just had to get some type of seat bandage for the time being. Con number 2, I'd say, about this truck is partially good and bad, because the suspension and the overall ride is pretty rough on it. I'd say it's not the worst. I only bring up, I guess it's like reference compared to like another vehicle, which was like like there was like a '01, '02 like Buick Century I got to ride in, and obviously that type of vehicle is like has like really soft suspension. I was pretty dang impressed. So in comparison to that, you know, something nice and soft, you need something hard for a truck. Obviously, it's not going to be the most comfortable ride, but yeah, suspension is pretty dang rough. But yeah, that's partially connected to why I had to upgrade the seat overall. But that makes it obviously better for hauling and stuff like that. So it's longer drives that is a big problem for me, and I'm pretty big, so I'm like around 240, 250 pounds, like around 6, pretty muscular, pretty big, not very skinny. So the third con, I'm still able to ride it pretty well. And the third con, I'd say, of this vehicle is pretty much no power steering. But then I was able to get pretty damn big and not stop, like, you know, getting small. So that's kind of the interesting thing. But the no power steering essentially just makes it easier or harder to maneuver the whole truck at slower speeds mainly. And it's not been a major deal breaker, and it's pretty much a pro because like you have to deal with one less fluid, but you have to like be pretty mindful of, like, you know, you need a lot of strength to move that steering wheel when you go into parking situations, stuff like that, and you just have to be a lot slower. Reversing, not as big as a deal, but yeah, no power steering can be a pretty big con for a lot of people that want to get into such a vehicle. But you know, obviously you can include it in some type of aftermarket way. So at this point, you know, if you want to include it, then you can just include it at this stage. I'll just bring up like putting some decent tires on the truck actually helped out a lot with the suspension and overall like rigidity of the vehicle. I ended up choosing or selecting 215 70 14 tires. That's pretty much 14 inches with a bit fatter wide rubber on it, and that pretty much helped a lot of the jumpiness and jerkiness, I believe, as far as the suspension goes, and it's a little better for hauling stuff. Overall, if you choose this type of truck, I think it would have been a big mistake if I chose to go with anything. Well, yeah, it's obviously like the stock rims on it, but I think it would have been a mistake to make the rims bigger, in my opinion, and to choose a smaller width for the tire. I think I would be absolutely wanting to sell it even more if I had chosen some thinner tires. So bigger rims but thinner tires, you know. That's just gonna be too dang aggressive, and I just probably it has better handling, right? But you kind of sacrifice the comfort, and that's kind of a big deal, at least for me. So there's been a bit of maintenance that's been done to this truck since I've actually last recorded the video for it. So yeah, obviously I have done pretty extensive things. Man, it was during 2021 when I got into an accident or rear-ended by somebody. I was unfortunate. It was at a roundabout, and pretty much it just gunned it into the rear of my vehicle. But it was a full paint job, bumper repair, any type of frame repair that was necessary. Next major thing I did after that, I fixed it and got all the paperwork sorted out for it, because it's now salvage title, unfortunately. But I did all the wheel stuff, wheel hub, brakes, tires again, or you know, not cheap tires anymore. I had cheap tires at one point, you know, didn't last long, too many miles. But yeah, just pretty much upgrade all the wheel stuff, get new screws on it, lug nuts, it's stuff like that. So just everything that pretty much involved the wheels and fluids for the brakes. And the next thing I did after that was, well, moving back in time. It actually did likely overheat due to maybe there was no coolant in the radiator or something like that happened, but I kind of blew the head gasket, I think. Might have already been done. I had a JV Weld thermostat bolts, you know. It was some shady work done to the truck, so I had to get it up to par and, you know, some other crap. But yeah, unfortunately I had to do the aftermarket head rebuild, and it wasn't actually as expensive as I thought it would be, but I got a pretty good deal with the guy, and pretty much it has a brand new head in the head gasket. The kit itself kind of like has everything that's kind of required, you know, for state and all that stuff. I've read a lot of forums that, you know, the heads have like little jet valves that are supposed to like increase power and fuel efficiency and stuff like that. I mean, just heard people get rid of them, and you know, just to have one less thing to maintain. I think a lot of people recommend it out of state, so you gotta do it out of state if you want to get it, you know, all done properly. But you know, you don't hear about it too much and stuff like that, so it's in the side of the head, so nobody really inspects that place anyways. But yeah, pretty much the vehicles or truck is pretty much fully stock. Yeah, I mean, when I first bought it, the clutch was ready to go down. A few steering and suspension parts needed to be, you know, I just updated essentially. Eventually I needed a right tie rod. I just went ahead and did a steering gear box rebuild, you know, pretty important at some point for the vehicle. Did a starter and alternator change, which unfortunately didn't fix much. It was kind of like a parts throw in. Eventually also the clutch cable was already maxed out. Did coolant hoses, antifreeze, the carbs were cleaned, the fuel filters had to be installed, and the tank was also had to be cleaned because it pretty much didn't get anywhere from the lot once it didn't have a good filter in the engine bay. It also had a filter in the rear of the truck, so finally gave it a mid-pipe and a muffler because it had the original rusted out, crusty and mid-pipe and muffler that just didn't work anymore. The battery eventually, and the starter solenoid was actually the main culprit of like vehicle not starting without any sound. Starter solenoid was actually installed because the new alternator, well, actually it was doing it with the older alternator and starter, interestingly enough. It was just occasions where the vehicle wouldn't start, but the main culprit was essentially the vehicle was overcharging. Yeah, they had to rethread the thermostat bolts, was not too difficult of a job on it. Also, as I said, it was JB welded, bolted on, fortunately. Eventually I was able to do some DIY and just do distributor cap rotor spark plug wires. That actually was done because the vehicle wasn't starting in cold and wet conditions, and that actually did resolve the problem with that. The spark plugs were replaced already, so they don't have too many miles yet. Rear tail lights were not coming on, so it just had to be rewired, fixed up. Battery terminals at some point had to be changed because I noticed that one of the terminals was cracked, and yeah, I just had to go ahead and change it already. We also had radiator cap. Oh, and also should mention that the radiator itself was restored essentially. Fan belts or running belts of the vehicle had to be replaced, just two of them, AC and water. Bought a K&N filter. I think they don't sell them no more for this vehicle. I just had to go with the similar diameter or something like that. Just probably, yeah, just put a K&N filter on it. Just a little bit more grunt. Even apart from that type of stuff, general TLC, that's probably necessary for a 40-year vehicle. After ownership of close to a decade, I've also been able to get a few other things down. Like obviously, there was like pretty much like 4 mounting bolts of the frame after the body work was done that kind of came loose. Just were not put in right or something. I just had to retorque a few bolts from the body or frame. Just retorque, you know, battery terminals. Just, you know, put a lot of like care and attention to put in wire loom around all the wiring so it looks a lot cleaner. Make sure nothing is rubbing against anything. I was actually running like bungee cords on the battery for quite some time. And yeah, I actually, underneath the driver's seat, there was actually a battery hold down kit for. That was probably stock for the vehicle. Just a bit crusty. I really only needed the front, or like the one side of it to work, because I'm still using the cords for the back side just to hold it a little bit better. Yeah, it holds it down nice and tight, not a big deal. Works well. Pressure switch was probably like the original one, and it actually like snaps at portion of like where the wire kind of sits on it and connects to it, so that was kind of weird. It also had a small light weeping of oil coming out of it. Pretty recently, if you didn't notice, the shift knob was like flopping like a fish. I've actually finally cleaned up my glove box and just pretty much found another piece of the shift knob adapter thing, and I just drilled it. Oh, this particular truck has like threads on the shift knob, and I actually still have the original one, but I kind of like this other one that has a bit more leverage on it, and I just decided to spend a bit of time threading it in with like a drill. Got everything nice and tight, so it's a lot better now. I actually started using Royal Purple Oil. I actually use 10W40 at this point. I don't see any point using 10W30. But yeah, so far no problems with that type of oil. It's actually quite expensive, and I read in a few forums that it kind of helps to cut down on vibration and stuff like that. I think there's just like a slight amount of thumpiness or torquiness on these types of vehicles when you use high quality. Unless you need that, you know, any type of oil will work for you. So yes, it's not exactly an easy endeavor and probably not recommended for everybody. I would say that, so has it been pretty simple owning this truck? Well, I'd say not entirely. I'd say probably the most difficult thing was probably dealing with the accident and deciding whether or not I wanted to keep it or not. That was back in 2021. Obviously the pandemic was kind of making car prices pretty extreme, but even to this day I'm kind of glad with my decision, just because insurance is pretty high, gas is pretty high, and yeah, overall I'd say it's not the worst choice. I'm pretty satisfied I did hold on to it longer. Obviously a big deal is like insurance and all the experiences I've been able to gain from it, so I mean it kind of balances out, right? So looking back at a retrospective view of this ownership, I'd say since 2017 2018 I've been able to kind of like drive it weekly, if not a little bit more than that. It's never really particularly sit apart from when it was getting maintenance, so it's been up and at 'em pretty much since every little hiccup that might have happened along the way. Yeah, typical vehicle usage, I'd say. Any vehicle pretty much can have a good deal of problems, and this one just, you know, that's probably quadruple the age of like your average looked at used vehicle. So I'd say more or less it would not be a good main vehicle, but it's definitely a better secondary if you got time it takes. But yes, initially my purchase of this truck was mainly as a secondary. I already had like my primary transport, which was a bike, motorcycle, and yeah, just usually I've just kept up with everything. I primarily have driven it, you know, to work sometimes, to the gym, you know, obviously groceries and other types of hauling work tasks that might entail. So it's done pretty well at all of those demands. And yeah, I really don't see any usage for any type of trailers where we live as much, so it still does the job as a city truck. Just to put things into perspective, I mean, nowadays I think most people would spend like 10 grand on like a vehicle, and that's mainly for like obviously like a reliable transportation and stuff like that. I think into it I am close to like 10 grand after 7 years of ownership, so that just puts into perspective like the inflation that we're currently in and just how difficult it is to keep up any type of hobby you might have nowadays.